was rich with clues pointing to a denouement exactly like this.
I mean, Geoffrey Archer, on the whole, is perhaps one of the entertainments of our political scene. He's fun, he's amusing, he should never be anywhere near political office. But as a novelist and as a party giver, there's probably not much harm in him. But the idea that he should be a serious candidate for political office, frankly, for a major political party, I think reflects very badly on that party.
It's easy to see why the party's ground troops love him and his attacks on Labour.
Mr. Chairman, I will challenge them, and when it comes to May the 4th next year, with your help, I will beat them.
It's less easy to see why at this year's party conference William Hague not only greeted him warmly, but also went out of his way to say to an interviewer, this candidate is a candidate of probity and integrity. Today he'd rather changed his tune.
We were given false assurances by Geoffrey Archer, and as soon as we've had an allegation about him that has been substantiated and shown to be true, we've acted quickly and correctly. And I think we've acted in good faith and in accordance with natural justice throughout.
Geoffrey Archer was clearly desperate to become mayor of this city, but few thought he'd make it to the end of the race. OK, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it just happens to be a fact that most journalists and most politicians thought something would emerge to stop him. But why couldn't the Tories see this? A senior Conservative told me today, it boils down to a question of William Hague's judgment. But you've got to understand, William was in a very difficult position. But why was it a difficult position? Some senior Conservatives say if Mr Hague had blocked Lord Archer, it could have rebounded and led to a court battle. So he decided instead that the allegations were well known, so it was best to leave it up to party members. But why not call in the new Ethics Committee, which after all he set up and boasted about?
I've set up a very powerful committee, an Ethics and Integrity Committee. That's part of the party reforms, because I'm determined that never again will the name of the Conservative Party be blackened by one candidate being guilty of some gross misconduct.
The three-person Ethics and Integrity Committee was set up with a remit to investigate allegations of conduct bringing or likely to bring the party into disrepute. It can also expeditiously investigate all matters put to it by the leader. It's meant to meet twice a year, although we're told it's never met. On the 5th of April last year, Lord Archer's biographer, Michael Crick, wrote Mr Hague a letter saying, in my view, Archer is a much sleazier character than Aitken or Hamilton or any of the other Tory miscreants of recent times, offering a private meeting to discuss this. More than a month later, Crick received a dismissive 3-line letter saying, I acknowledge receipt of your letter and its contents have been noted. In June 1998, former Deputy Chief Whip, Sir Timothy Kitson, wrote urging that the Ethics Committee should investigate Lord Archer. Some Tories are not impressed all this has been ignored.
The candidates on the shortlist should have all been given a grilling by the Ethics and Integrity Committee on ethics and integrity, not on their managerial capabilities, not on their politics, but on ethics and integrity. This was a high-profile position, and we, as a party, couldn't afford to get tripped up in the way in which we have been. It's been run like a cosy little club, a cosy little kind of champagne and shepherd's pie type club, where, you know, if you don't expect the club members to kind of lie to you. Well, I'm afraid we're in a different era in politics now, and we've got to act in a very professional way.
This is not over yet. Lord Archer won £500,000 in damages when the Daily Star suggested he'd slept with a prostitute to whom he had paid £2,000 to leave the country. The journalist Adam Raphael gave evidence that Lord Archer had told him that he had met the woman, something Lord Archer denied in court. Mr Raphael says now he knows the full story and will publish it in this week's Economist, if the lawyers let him. He says William Hague has made a big mistake.
Obviously he must have feared that Lord Archer was a very popular figure in the party, had a lot of debts on which he could call, a lot of powerful friends, and he just funked it. It wasn't, of course, just William Hague. A lot of members of Lady Thatcher's cabinet also came out, 8 of them, in support of Lord Archer. John Major, Margaret Thatcher, Cecil Parkinson, Michael Howard. They all ought to have known better. And if they didn't, they were just lazy, because the facts were there.
So, who will be the new candidate? Former Cabinet Minister Virginia Bottomley has said today she cares deeply about London and has not ruled herself out. Asda boss and Deputy Conservative Chairman Archie Norman is flattered he's been mentioned and has not ruled himself out. MP John Wilkinson wants the contest open as wide as possible and has ruled himself in. while former Minister Steve Norris, who was second last time, is a bit disgruntled by the way the party's handled all this. Despite his own spot of bother with the tabloids over an active love life, he thinks the Ethics Committee shouldn't get bound up in philosophical debates about natural justice.
I'd always assumed it was there not so much to act as a great court of law, but actually to act in terms of saying, look, are you an appropriate person or not? And sometimes, you know, in public life, it's not a question of anything more than saying, I don't like the smell. Maybe I can't find the dead rat, but the smell in here is awful. You know, that's what this process is all about.
Lord Archer's wife and son went out and left him at home tonight. This is the most profound disgrace he's ever been in. He's been thrown out of the Conservative group in the Lords, and his lie has been referred to the Ethics Committee, which could now recommend expelling him from the party. It's hard to see how even the most resilient of politicians could bounce back.
Mark Mardell, well, now in discussion, first of all, Stephan Shakespeare joins us from Cambridge, who's Geoffrey Archer's friend and advisor, and who's just indeed come from his house. You said today that Geoffrey Archer was devastated. Presumably he's devastated at being found out, not devastated at any wrongdoing.
Well, Geoffrey knows he's done wrong and he feels extremely sorry. Here's a man who's spent the day writing letters of apology. I mean, I have to say to you, he's about this big.
Shouldn't have stood knowing all this, though, should he?
Pardon?
He shouldn't have stood for mayor knowing all this.
Well, I think this is something that happened 12, 13 years ago. That doesn't excuse it, but he obviously thought it was in the past.
He thought it was in the past, didn't he, when he saw William Hague just last week? Because then, is it true that he spent the first 20 minutes trying to convince William Hague that actually not to panic and, you know, he'd get over it and he would still make a good mayor?
I wasn't part of that conversation, so I can't possibly tell you about that. All I know is that earlier that day we had been outlining the various positions, and Geoffrey was quite clear that he would have to go.
Max Hastings, editor of the Evening Standard, isn't the idea that William Hague could not have inquired thoroughly into Geoffrey Archer preposterous?
I don't think one should look at this simply in terms of William Hague. It goes much further back. You've got to say that 3 successive Conservative leaders have placed their faith in this man. John Major made him a peer. John Major appeared happy to accept his hospitality, to give him hospitality, to have him in his entourage. Margaret Thatcher was happy to have him around. What we're looking at here is a man who, over a very long period, has been perceived by a lot of us as incapable of distinguishing truth from falsehood. Archer's difficulties with the truth go way back to his expenses as a GLC councillor, to innumerable business deals, to allegations of shoplifting in Canada. We've got a man with a record as long as your arm. And I personally have said to a long succession of Conservative ministers, how can you traffic with this man? And the answer is, I'm afraid, it's the old business. Politicians always need people to do party business for them, to go and speak in their constituencies, to entertain them lavishly, do all the rest of it.
Spoke for John Major in the 1992 campaign. Did you ever voice your concerns to William Hague?
No. Actually, that is not true. I voiced my concerns to William Hague about a month ago at a private meeting when we happened to be there at lunch, and he replied, let the people decide.
Michael Crick, you went further than that because, as we reported there, you wrote to William Hague and only received a terse reply from Sebastian Coe. Why did you feel it necessary to write to William Hague in such detail?
Well, I mean, as a journalist, I think one should be very, very wary about interfering in the political process in that way. But I felt that there comes a point at which public duty demands it, that actually this man was not fit to hold public office. And that's why I wrote the letter. I said it would do enormous damage to London and to his party, and that there were all sorts of other stories that were bound to come out. And frankly, some of the things I know are worse than what has come out this weekend. And
do you expect to be able to substantiate these soon?
Some of the stories I think will be substantiated very, very quickly. Others will be much harder to substantiate.
Well, with us too is Shaun Woodward, who's the Shadow Minister for London, who wishes to have a separate interview in this discussion. But can I put first of all the points to you that successive Tory leaders have been well aware of Geoffrey Archer's shortcomings, but have decided to turn a blind eye simply because he was a rabble-rouser, he had money, he dispensed largesse in the party, and frankly, you needed that.
Well, I can see now with hindsight, it's very easy to describe it like that. What I will say, no, you asked me a question, let me answer it. What I will say is the moment we had a specific allegation, which only actually came on Friday, we investigated it, and by the end of that evening, William had dismissed Geoffrey Archer from being the Conservative candidate for mayor.
You'd have been happy had this not come out, though, wouldn't you?
We'd have been happy had the man who actually came forward to the News of the World actually come forward to us in the summer of this year, told us, I can promise you now, that had he done so, William Hague would have immediately insisted that we convene the Ethics Committee, and I can assure you now, Geoffrey Archer would never have been the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London.
But we've just heard that Michael Crick had the foresight to do what he thought was his public duty and right to William Hague, and got short shrift. This was not the sign that somebody was actually going to take any of these allegations seriously, even though you knew that Michael Crick had a substantial unauthorised biography of Geoffrey Archer published.
Two crucial points here. The first relates to the issue about share dealings in Anglia, just as an example of this. Twice Geoffrey Archer was investigated about Anglia shares by the DTI. Twice they concluded that there was no evidence on which to base a prosecution.
Insufficient.
Recently, the Labour Secretary of State for Trade announced there would be another investigation. Only on Friday of last week, he announced that having investigated it, there was no case, there was no case to answer. Now, the problem that we faced in the Conservative Party, and if Michael Crick had been able to come forward in June of this year with this evidence... I don't want to revisit history at the moment, but the fact is that, we know he falsified his academic qualifications. You are revisiting history by asking me about leaders of the Conservative Party and their relationship with Geoffrey Archer, so let me explain. If Michael Crick had come forward with the material that the News of the World had this weekend, this summer, and given it to William Hague, again I can tell you, we would have convened the Ethics Committee and Geoffrey Archer would never have stood as the candidate for Mayor of London.
This is all making a mockery, though, of the Ethics and Integrity Committee, isn't it?
No. William set up the Ethics Committee.
When is it met?
If you want to ask me the question, let me answer it.
When is it met?
If you ask me, it makes a mockery of the Ethics Committee, so let me answer that question. The Ethics Committee was set up to respond to specific allegations. That is in the constitution of the party. What we had finally on Friday was a specific allegation to which we responded. And within hours, William did what he said he would do with the party, which is that he would not stand for this kind of public wrongdoing, and he dismissed Geoffrey Archer from standing as our candidate.
Another controversial figure in the party is the Treasurer, Michael Ashcroft. Now, we don't want to go into any detail of that, but he has brought a libel action against the Times. But the Foreign Office officials expressed disquiet. Would it not have been better now to say that let's test that Michael Ashcroft case in front of the Ethics Committee?
Well, I think it's wholly improper to raise the question of Michael Ashcroft in the context of which we're discussing Geoffrey Archer right now. What we're doing with Geoffrey Archer is discussing somebody who told the News of the World on Friday that he had actually asked someone to construct an alibi with false evidence. And I really think it's wholly inappropriate to raise the question of Michael Ashcroft. Some people would conclude that was a smear.
Well, do you think it's now time to expel Geoffrey Archer from the party?
The decision of that is now being referred to the Ethics Committee, and they will make a decision on that very soon.
Eric Chalker, from the Conservative Charter Movement, when you hear all this and you hear what's going on, the very fact that people did vote for Geoffrey Archer in their droves in London, what does that say to you about what the Conservative Party wants from their candidate?
Well, I feel totally dissatisfied in hearing what Shaun Woodward is saying. It seems to me the whole business has been handled extremely sloppily. It isn't true to say that the Ethics and Integrity Committee was set up to consider specific allegations only. I've got a copy of the Constitution in my pocket, and it explicitly says that any person can be referred to that committee at the absolute discretion of the leader. And it is clearly, it was the intention that that committee would deal with things which were being rumoured, which were being said. If that committee was only set up to deal with allegations that were being put in front of a court of law, it wouldn't have been needed.
Max Hastings.
I'd like to ask one question of Shaun Woodward. You were saying that it's only with hindsight, as you pretend, that Archer's wrongdoing is clear. Have you ever met anyone in the City of London who believes that Geoffrey Archer behaved ethically in the Anglia shares transaction?
Let me say that Shaun Woodward will answer these questions in a minute, because he has said he does not wish to take part in an absolute discussion about this. Michael Crick, had you been able to go with something more substantial, then it would have actually made more of an impact.
If William Hague had invited me into his office, I cannot believe in a million years he would have allowed Archer's candidate to go ahead. I mean, the list of things I had to tell him about was huge. I mean, and far worse than has happened here. The problem the Conservatives have made...
you couldn't substantiate that.
No, a lot of it could be substantiated, and I was prepared to, I was willing to tell you what the sources were, and I was willing to offer ways in which Mr. Hague could have corroborated what I'd said. There were people who'd worked in central office who knew about a lot of the things that I had to talk about. The failure the Conservative Party's made here is to treat this legalistically, as if it was a court of law. Funnily enough, it's exactly the same mistake the Labour Party made over the militant tendency in the early 80s. The key thing was the Conservatives were appointing here Archer to a job. You don't appoint people to a job on the bounds of natural justice and things like that. You say, look, there are allegations here about you being dodgy, about you being dishonest. We want you to answer those allegations. And they should have done it over the Anglia affair and a whole load of other things. And if Archer wasn't prepared to give adequate answers to questions about those affairs, Hague should have said, right, that's it, you're not going to be candidate.
At this moment, Shaun Woodward, could you answer these points?
Ask me the specific points you want to raise.
First of all, Max Hastings' point about, do you think people in the city were sure of Jeffrey Archer's probity?
As far as we know, the Department of Trade and Industry investigated Jeffrey twice over the issue of Anglia shares. If this committee comes back and twice says there is no evidence on which to base a case for prosecution, and only recently Stephen Byers comes back and he has to say only last Friday there is no evidence, I have to tell you that it is absolutely ludicrous for anyone to suggest that somehow some other committee could have actually come up with a different conclusion. Now, what William said, and this is crucial, is that Jeffrey Archer has brought the party into huge disrepute. He has embarrassed the party. And I will say now, we are very sorry about the embarrassment that Jeffrey Archer has caused. But when Michael Ancram said to him, straight between the eyes this summer, Jeffrey, is there anything we should know that could damage us and bring you and the party into disrepute? He categorically said, no, there is nothing at all. Now, there's a sense here of natural justice. How many times are you going to try a man? He was effectively tried twice about Anglia shares by the DTI committee, and each time he was found to be not guilty by them.
When he spoke to Michael Ancram and said that, he was lying.
He was lying.
Thank you very much. At that moment, I just have to hold it, because Jeffrey Archer appears to be a man without self-doubt. Probably even now, with the Daily Star appealing the verdict of the Coughlin libel case. He's brazened out falsehoods about his academic qualifications, disquiet about his Anglia share dealing, and now asking a friend to lie for him.
Jeffrey Howard Archer,
Conservative.
43,379.
The Conservatives have always known that Archer was a bit of a chancer, but on the stump as mayoral candidate, he somehow didn't mention his time at the GLC in the 60s, when he was taking 10% for filling out fellow councillors' claims for expenses and allowances.
Morning, Dr. Morning. How are you? Nice to see you again.
His first stint as an MP ended with a financial scandal which forced him out of Parliament, and in the 70s he was arrested on suspicion of shoplifting suits in Toronto, an allegation which surfaced again as he was preparing to stand for mayor.
Were you arrested on suspicion of shoplifting in Toronto, as some people believe, or were you not?
Are there any other questions on London?
By the 80s, he was dependent on fiction, and with a newly made fortune, he was welcomed back by the Conservatives with open arms as deputy chairman of the party. Then the Monica scandal broke, and he was out again, although £500,000 the richer after winning his libel case against the Daily Star.
Well, my dears, we got Jeffrey here today. What is well known to you all for his debatable qualities.
Soon he was John Major's warm-up man in the 1992 election campaign.
He had two inestimable things. One was money, and the other was a sort of political charm. And so he was a perfect combination. And this led two prime ministers to endorse him, obviously from the heart, in their memoirs, Thatcher and Major. And in doing so, they were endorsing someone who a lot of people suspected or knew at the time was a liar and a crook.
Then came the Anglia TV shares scandal, allegations of insider dealing and a DTI probe. But there was a Prime Minister when he needed him.
I've always feels for an old friend, but I'm not going to comment on it.
Even with all that baggage, he had the gall to set out for the streets paved with gold and the dream of London mayor. He was even going to dress as Dick Whittington at his Millennium Party. But now he's had to turn again. The fate of his compatriot Jonathan Aiken, now residing at Her Majesty's pleasure, weighed on him not one jot, because he thought he had the financial might, if not right, on his side.
Well, inside the Conservative Party, there's a culture of toleration, to put it mildly, where people like him and Jonathan Aiken are concerned. In his case, he's a celebrity populist with a hell of a lot of money. And the party is in constant need of money. And so the Conservative Party did not go out of its way, to put it mildly, to be too inquisitive.
Wherever Archer has gone, two primates have followed. We'll have to see if there are more banana skins.
Good luck, banana, surely.
We're now joined in this group by Fay Weldon, who's a personal friend of Jeffrey Archer's. Fay, do you think he's still the man to be Mayor of London?
I still do. I mean, more than ever. This seems to me like a kind of witch hunt. Yeah, last week he was Lord Archer. Today he's Idi Amin. This man is not a wicked man.
But
he's all kinds of things.
Last week we didn't know that he'd asked a friend to lie for him.
This is something he said 13 years ago on the telephone, in some sort of panic or mood about a case which didn't even come to court. You don't even know that had it come to court he would have rung him up and say the truth. Well, you don't know what would have happened next.
Well, the case of course came to court, but that particular aspect of it wasn't
no, it
tested
wasn't.
in court.
But who is to say what they would have said before then and now? I mean, I'm not going to argue this point particularly, but I would just say that your book was what endeared me first to Jeffrey Archer, because it seemed to, because I thought it was a completely brilliant book. But it presented him as an invented man. He invents himself. Well, if you had a mother like Geoffrey has, you would.
Well, let me just bring Nicholas Shakespeare. Let me bring Stephan Shakespeare to this at the moment, because you've just heard in the previous discussion Michael Crick saying there is more to come and there is worse to come. In your discussions today, and I know you are a close friend of Jeffrey Archer's, are you sure there is nothing else to come?
Well, look, I don't know the man's life. I don't know it as well as Michael Crick. But I'll tell you something very interesting. The way allegations fly around now. I had lunch with Michael Crick 16 months ago, and I asked him, do you actually think that Jeffrey stole suits, slept with Monica Coughlin, and was guilty of insider trading? And Mr. Crick said, no.
No,
quite clear. He won't deny that.
That is not true.
Now, it is true, and you know I can show it. The problem is that now any allegation that's made is immediately believed. You can just throw out anything you like.
This is an allegation that is this allegation about asking a friend to lie, I'm afraid, is true.
It's absolutely true. He knows he's done extremely wrong. He's on the floor, devastated. I mean, he is really sorry. You're absolutely right. What he did was completely wrong, and he accepts that.
How does he survive so long then, Michael Crick?
First of all, can I just say that Stephan's memory of that lunch is totally different from mine. I remember the questions. My recollection is I said, I don't know whether he did those things. That was a very cautious answer, because I didn't know whether Stephan was going to go back to Archer and initiate legal action. But how does he survive
so long?
He survived so long because far too many people have allowed him to survive in the Conservative leadership and so on. And I have to say, I think journalists are partly guilty here. I mean, there are far too many broadcasters who've given him far too easy a time. I mean, he's never been asked about the Anglia affair, as far as I know, on radio or television, ever.
Tell me what his tactics are, Max Hastings. I mean, he has a capacity to bully journalists mercilessly.
To bully journalists, but also to flatter them. He's been brilliantly successful at calling in favours and making friends. What we have to remember, the bottom line of this, I have great respect for Fay and Stephan for making the best case they can for this wretched man, now that he's ruined, that he was their friend. If he'd stuck to writing his dreadful books and charity auctioneering, I don't think any of us would have had anything to say about his awful life. But this was a man who stood for public office. 3 leaders of the Conservative Party, a whole raft of politicians said this was a man fit to be trusted with the affairs of London. And the reason I feel a sense of outrage, I don't feel an outrage towards Archer. Archer is no more capable of not lying than a fox of staying away from the chickens. I feel a rage towards all these politicians and rich and powerful people who took his bloody champagne, who went to his parties, who entertained him, and who were prepared to put London, the greatest capital in Europe, in this man's hands.
He's talking about people like you, Fay.
But how do you know that he would be a bad mayor? Huey Long,
it's a reasonable assumption that somebody who's lied through his teeth all his life is not likely to be very good as custodian of a great city.
The great mayors of America, of Chicago, of New York, of Washington, have not been good, noble, men of incredible probity. They have been energetic, charismatic, good organisers.
How can a proven liar be in charge of the Metropolitan Police?
We have become...
the Mayor of London will be in charge of the appointing the new Metropolitan Police Authority.
Will he?
Appoints a majority of the members of the new Metropolitan Police Authority.
Well,
how can you have a proven liar in that position?
Well, I don't know where you're going to find a politician who isn't a proven liar.
Well, the point, presumably, Max Hastings, is how do the Conservatives move on from here? Because they're going to have to appoint somebody else. Now, if you're prepared to take Jeffrey Archer, then
I think they made a mistake by not going for Steve Norris, who actually, whatever his personal embarrassments, you may say at worst he's a cad and a bounder, but Steve Norris, I think, would be a highly competent mayor who knows a lot about the key issues facing London. The question all the political parties ought to be asking themselves after this, how are they going to make sure? Harold Wilson managed to surround himself with scoundrels. John Major, Thatcher had their share of scoundrels. How are we going to avoid these scoundrels getting into the summits of British political life?
Stephan Shakespeare, do you think that, that Jeffrey Archer himself now expects his time in the Conservative Party to be coming to a swift end?
I would expect exactly that.
So he expects to be kicked out of the party, not just to have the whip removed?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm not going to comment on what's going to happen next there, but clearly he doesn't have a future in Conservative politics. He has a great future as a man who is full of creative energy, who has a vision, and I know that he will have still a great deal to give.
And where do you think the forum will be for him, which he will give that? Will it be charity? Will it be giving money away from his books? What will it be? What is it going to be his atonement?
Well, first of all, as I say, he is extremely contrite, and he will continue to work very hard for charities. You know, we've had calls all day from some of his favourite charities saying, you know, please still work for us.
Has he had calls from politicians?
Yes, he has.
Like whom?
And I'm not going to mention names, that's personal.
OK, thank you all very much indeed.